The game of basketball has always been about love. So it's a good thing I had my agent and good friend.
At 56, Vlade Divac stands as one of the most influential international players ever to set foot in the NBA. The calm smile is still there, the relaxed posture is still there, and the same sense of composure that defined his entire career remains intact. What changed is the way people talk about him. Today, when Divac walks into an arena, he is not introduced as a former All-Star or a Kings executive first. He is introduced as the man who opened America's eyes to what European big men could be. Long before stretch fives, long before point centers, long before ball-moving systems became the league's trend, Divac brought a new idea into the paint. He played the position with intelligence, timing, and vision. He made passing a weapon. He made spacing a science. He made teammates better without demanding the spotlight. Fans remember the flair, the misdirection, the little taps, the clever screens, and the way he could run an offense from the high post like a veteran guard. Teammates remember something else. No matter how physical or chaotic the game became, Divac kept teams connected. What most people never saw was the pressure he carried as one of the first European pioneers in the league. Every mistake became a headline, every success became a debate about whether international players belonged. Divac handled all of it without losing his sense of humor or his sense of confidence. He earned respect not by out-muscling opponents, but by outthinking them. That is why his list means something. When a player known for composure, teamwork, and basketball IQ singles out 5 opponents he respected the most, it reveals what truly challenged him. And today, we count down the 5 players he respected the most. Vlade Divac was born in Prijepolje, Serbia during the era of Yugoslavian basketball dominance. By the time he reached his early 20s, European scouts already viewed him as a new kind of center, someone who relied on awareness, timing, and creativity instead of brute force. When the Lakers brought him to the NBA at 21, he entered a league built on power matchups, isolation plays, and physical punishment inside the paint. The adjustment was immediate and demanding, yet Divac embraced it with the same relaxed confidence that shaped his entire career. He never tried to overpower opponents. He beat them with angles, footwork, and decisions. He knew how to slow the pace when needed, and he knew how to speed it up when teammates needed space to shine. Coaches trusted him because he understood the game 2 steps ahead. Players trusted him because he made the floor easier for everyone. That is also why his respect carries weight. The 5 names on his list represent the opponents who forced him to evolve, who challenged his habits, who punished every mistake, and who demanded his absolute best. They shaped his identity in the league. Now it is time to start with number 5. Number 5 is Tim Duncan, a player Divac always described with one word: precision. Duncan never needed theatrics, noise, or intimidation. He played a brand of basketball that punished mistakes quietly but relentlessly. For Divac, matching up with Duncan was like sitting across from a chess master who refused to rush, refused to panic, and refused to give away anything easy. Divac first noticed Duncan's impact long before the Kings and Spurs met in the playoffs. The way Duncan controlled spacing stood out. He didn't shove defenders off the block or overpower them with raw strength. Instead, he used angles, pivot, steps, and simple footwork to create advantages. Against most defenders, those moves produced comfortable mid-range jumpers or soft hooks. Against Divac, they produced something different: lessons. Every possession against Duncan demanded total discipline. If Divac shifted weight too early, Duncan countered. If Divac showed help too late, Duncan finished. If Divac tried to speed him up, Duncan slowed the tempo even more. That ability to dictate pace frustrated many centers, but Divac respected it because it came from fundamentals, not arrogance. The early 2000s playoff battles between Sacramento and San Antonio elevated that respect. Those were nights when every rebound mattered and every defensive rotation felt like a playoff puzzle. Duncan's composure during those battles impressed Divac more than any stat line. When the arena got loud and possessions tightened, Duncan didn't change his expression or his approach. He stayed patient, reading the floor, punishing mismatches, and spacing the offense with textbook timing. Divac often said Duncan made him play cleaner. There was no room for sloppy foot placement, lazy contests, or delayed help. Duncan demanded structure. Even the Kings' ball movement style, which usually created chaos for opposing defenses, didn't shake him. He stayed grounded, trusted angles, and made Sacramento earn every point. But the respect ran deeper than on-court battles. Divac admired Duncan for his professionalism. No trash talk, no theatrics, no unnecessary conflict. In an era filled with loud personalities, Duncan competed with silence and purpose. Divac understood the power in that. He knew Duncan's style influenced a generation and became the standard for how a modern big should operate: efficient, disciplined, and unselfish. By the time their matchup slowed down, Divac considered Duncan a blueprint. Not just a star, not just a champion, but a model of how to control a game without forcing it. That is why Tim Duncan opens this list. He wasn't the loudest opponent Divac faced, but he was one of the most demanding and one of the most respected. Number 4 is Shaquille O'Neal, the most physically overwhelming challenge Vlade Divac ever faced. Every center in the league had to rethink their approach when Shaq entered the paint, but for Divac, the adjustment was even more dramatic. He was never built to match raw force with raw force. Instead, he needed strategy, anticipation, and constant movement just to survive the impact. Their rivalry reached its peak during the Lakers-Kings battles of the early 2000s, a period defined by intensity, national attention, and relentless pressure. Divac entered those matchups knowing exactly what was coming: deep seals, violent bumps, and finishes that tested the strength of the rim. But Divac also knew he could disrupt Shaq's rhythm with positioning, quick decisions, and clever timing. He forced Shaq to work for space-attacked angles and used every inch of his basketball IQ to counter the most dominant presence of his generation. What elevated the respect between them was honesty. Shaq openly called Divac one of the smartest bigs I ever faced, acknowledging the challenge of guarding someone who refused to be intimidated. Divac in return admired Shaq's transparency. Shaq never hid his intentions. He told the league he would play through opponents, not around them. Divac respected that clarity. Those games captured the contrast between styles. Every possession in the post was a battle of ideas. Shaq brought force. Divac brought reading skills. Shaq brought mass. Divac brought leverage. There were times when Shaq bulldozed through. There were also sequences when Divac disrupted him with quick feet and early rotations. The iconic moments, the bumps, the counters, the contested hooks became part of NBA history because both players refused to back away from the challenge. Divac also recognized something few talked about: Shaq's awareness as a passer. When Divac tried to load the paint too aggressively, Shaq found shooters. When Divac tried to front him, Shaq sealed deeper. Every adjustment required another adjustment. That constant recalibration forced Divac to sharpen his reads and trust his instincts. What lasted beyond the rivalry was mutual appreciation. Off the floor, Shaq's humor matched Divac's. They exchanged jokes, shared stories, and understood that competition never erased respect. Their personalities were different, but their approach to the game was grounded in pride and responsibility. For Divac, Shaq represented the ultimate test. Not just strength, not just dominance, but the challenge of finding solutions against a force that changed the entire geometry of the court. That is why Shaquille O'Neal holds the number 4 spot, the opponent who demanded total creativity and total commitment every single night. Number 3 is Hakeem Olajuwon, the opponent Vlade Divac considered the most unpredictable big man of his era. If Shaquille O'Neal overwhelmed opponents with force and Duncan controlled them with fundamentals, Olajuwon challenged them with movement no one could anticipate. Divac often said that guarding Hakeem felt like trying to defend smoke, present dangerous but impossible to grab. The respect began early. Before their playoff meetings, Divac studied Olajuwon's footwork on film and understood it was unlike anything in the league. The spins, the counters, the hesitation fakes, and the balance on every pivot forced defenders into constant guessing games. But watching tape and experiencing it live were two different realities. Once on the floor, Divac realized Olajuwon didn't rely on predetermined moves. He adapted every possession, reading the defender's weight, reacting to every shift, and punishing hesitation with effortless speed. Divac valued intelligence, and that is why he admired Olajuwon. Every sequence was a mental exercise. If Divac tried to push him away from the middle, Olajuwon slid baseline. If Divac tried to anticipate a fadeaway, Olajuwon went inside shoulder. If Divac worked to deny position, Hakeem used footwork to create space. Guards often talked about handling quick perimeter players, but Divac knew that no perimeter player forced more adjustments than Olajuwon. Rockets vs. Lakers and Rockets vs. Kings games revealed how demanding the matchup was. Divac prided himself on controlling tempo, but Olajuwon could shift pace instantly. One possession, Hakeem slowed everything down with calculated post moves. The next, he exploded into a move that left defenders leaning the wrong direction. Divac respected that blend of patience and burst a combination only a handful of players in league history ever possessed. There was also an element of professionalism that Divac admired deeply. Olajuwon never needed theatrics or intimidation. He competed with discipline, humility, and training-level precision. Divac believed that made every matchup feel like a battle between two minds rather than two bodies. He learned to value angles, timing, and recovery because Olajuwon punished even the smallest mistake. By the end of their careers, Divac regarded Olajuwon as a template for skill-based centers. He often credited Hakeem for helping him refine his own timing and decision-making, especially when defending elite scorers in the post. That respect never faded. For Divac, Hakeem Olajuwon was not only a superstar but a teacher disguised as an opponent. That is why he takes the number 3 spot, the rival who redefined what footwork, intelligence, and balance could look like in the paint. Number 2 is Arvydas Sabonis, the one opponent who felt less like a rival and more like a mirror. Divac didn't just respect Sabonis, he admired him long before either of them became fixtures in NBA discussions. In Europe, Sabonis was already a legend, a giant with guard vision and a mind wired for precision. When the two finally crossed paths in the NBA, Divac approached those games with a sense of familiarity and a sense of responsibility. He understood he wasn't only facing a great center, he was representing a generation shaped by Sabonis' example. The respect between them came from shared values. Both thrived on passing. Both played angles instead of brute force. Both understood spacing as a language, not a tactic. For Divac, Sabonis was the standard for how a European big man could control the game without relying on athletic dominance. Even as Sabonis arrived in the NBA past his physical prime, his presence still commanded attention because of his instincts, timing, and court awareness. Kings versus Blazers matchups became quiet masterclasses in decision-making. These games often looked different from typical Western Conference battles. Instead of wrestling for position or relying on power, Divac and Sabonis traded reads. One would high post to facilitate an action. The other responded with a counter read. They used eye contact, subtle screens, and deliberate footwork to bend defenses without drawing much noise from the crowd. Analysts often focused on star guards during those games, but players noticed the duel inside two minds, processing the floor 3 steps ahead. Divac always credited Sabonis for refining his understanding of patience. Sabonis never rushed a possession, even when pressured. He waited for the right angle, the right cut, the right moment. Divac respected that discipline because it aligned with his own approach to the game. They were competitors, yet every meeting felt like a lesson. There was also cultural significance. Sabonis represented the generation before Divac. He proved long ago that European big men could excel against American power and athleticism. Divac acknowledged he wouldn't have earned early NBA trust without the blueprint Sabonis created overseas. That influence carried weight every time they shook hands before tip-off. For Divac, Sabonis was more than a rival. He was a foundation, someone who shaped how he viewed the sport, how he read defenses, and how he valued creativity over force. That is why Arvydas Sabonis stands at number 2, the opponent who defined what a European center could become and the one Divac admired from the very beginning. Number 1 is Chris Webber, the player Vlade Divac respected more than anyone because their connection went far beyond matchups. It was chemistry, trust, and a shared understanding of how basketball should be played. While Duncan challenged Divac with precision, Shaq with force, and Olajuwon with unpredictability, Webber challenged him with partnership. Together, they formed one of the most intelligent front-court duos of their generation. Sacramento's rise in the early 2000s didn't happen because of one star. It happened because Divac and Webber moved like two ends of the same idea. Divac controlled the high post with vision, while Webber operated from the elbow with power, finesse, and anticipation. They didn't need extended conversations or elaborate signals. A quick glance or a subtle head nod was enough. Webber understood when Divac wanted to initiate a backdoor cut, when he wanted to reset spacing, or when he planned to pull the defense inward before hitting an open shooter. Divac admired Webber's versatility. Webber could score inside, step out for mid-range jumpers, push the break, and create opportunities for teammates. But what earned Divac's respect most was Webber's willingness to share responsibility. Many power forwards with Webber's talent demanded the offense flow through them. Webber welcomed balance. He trusted Divac to read plays and encouraged the Kings to run their offense through both front-court players. That trust elevated every possession. Their synergy showed in pivotal playoff moments. When defenses denied cutters, they improvised. When opponents doubled, Divac relocated for a better passing angle. When Divac got trapped, Webber flashed to open gaps and kept the play alive. The flow looked simple on television, but it required two players who viewed the game through the same lens. Divac also respected Webber off the floor. He valued how Webber embraced Sacramento, how he handled pressure, and how he stood up for teammates. Webber's leadership wasn't loud, but it was consistent. Divac appreciated that steadiness because it matched his own approach. By the end of their run together, Divac believed that Webber was the ideal teammate for a thinking big man. Webber amplified his strengths, covered his weaknesses, and shared a basketball language that few players ever develop. Their partnership became the identity of the Kings, unselfish, creative, and fearless. That is why Chris Webber stands at number 1. He wasn't just the player Divac respected the most. He was the teammate who brought out the best version of him and helped define one of the most beloved teams of their era. Vlade Divac's list says more about his identity than any stat sheet ever could. Tim Duncan represents the discipline and technical excellence Divac valued. Shaquille O'Neal represents the physical challenge that forced him to innovate. Hakeem Olajuwon represents the skill and unpredictability that refined his understanding of timing. Arvydas Sabonis represents the foundation of European creativity that shaped his basketball education. And Chris Webber represents the partnership that allowed Divac to reach his most complete form as a player. These 5 names reflect the qualities Divac respected most in the sport: intelligence, adaptability, teamwork, efficiency, and trust. He never measured greatness through highlights or showmanship. He measured it through the pressure an opponent applied, the adjustments they demanded, and the standards they set. Each player on his list pushed him to think faster, react smarter, and challenge his own limitations. Together, they form the story of Divac's NBA journey, a journey defined not by overpowering opponents, but by matching their strengths with IQ, patience, and awareness. His legacy lives on through the generations of international big men who followed players who learned that the game can be controlled through decision-making as much as through power. For older fans who lived through that era, the memory of Divac's style still carries weight. It was different, clever, and ahead of its time. Now the question goes to you: which 5 players would make your list of the most respected opponents in NBA history?